Hello and welcome to the Vailrun Tapes. Every story here is true. It happened to a real person, and they wrote it down or said it out loud, so the rest of us would know. Tonight, I'll share a few of them with you. A lot of you come back here every night, and that means a lot to me. These stories stay with people. That's just what they do. Before we start, drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. I read all of them. And if you like these stories, a quick like and subscribe really help. Now get comfortable, take a slow breath, and let's begin.
I was around 9 or 10 years old when this happened, and even now I can still picture the upstairs hallway of our house exactly as it looked that day. I had invited a friend over to play. We were in my bedroom on the second floor. I have changed rooms since then, but at the time, my bedroom was directly across the hallway from my older sister's room. The doors faced one another. If I sat on my bed and looked through my open doorway, I had a clear view into her bedroom. There was no corner blocking it, and no long hallway between us. I could see most of her room without even standing up. My sister and I were 7 years apart. I was around 10, which meant she was about 17. Like many younger siblings, I found nearly everything she did irritating. If she played music, it was too loud. If she had friends over, they were annoying. If she spoke on the phone, I felt as though she was doing it specifically to bother me. I was not always reasonable about it. That afternoon, my friend and I were sitting on my bed, playing and joking around. We were probably talking too loudly ourselves, but that did not matter to me. My mother was downstairs, washing dishes. As far as I knew, she was the only other person in the house. My friend and I continued playing until I noticed movement in the room across from us. My sister was home. I could see her pacing around her bedroom while speaking to someone on the phone. She wore a pink t-shirt and jeans. Her hair was pulled back into a ponytail. I remember those details clearly. She was not hidden in shadow or standing far away. It was daytime, and I had a direct view of her. She moved back and forth through her room the way people often do when talking on the phone. She held the phone near her ear and seemed completely focused on the conversation. I could hear her voice, although I could not understand everything she was saying. She seemed normal. There was nothing pale, transparent, or ghost-like about her. It was my sister. My friend could see her too. At first, neither of us thought there was anything strange about the situation. We simply believed my sister had come home without us noticing. I quickly became irritated because I thought she was talking too loudly. I was a brat at that age, so instead of closing my door or asking politely, I looked across the hallway and told her to shut up. My sister did not react. She continued pacing with the phone beside her ear. Her voice did not change. She did not pause or look toward me. That was unusual. My sister was 17. If her 10-year-old little sister told her to shut up, she would have responded immediately. She might have told me to mind my own business, mocked me, or threatened to tell Mum what I had said. At the very least, she would have looked over with an annoyed expression. Instead, she acted as though I did not exist. I thought she was deliberately ignoring me. That made me angrier. I told her to shut up again, louder this time. Nothing. She kept walking back and forth. Her ponytail moved slightly as she turned. She continued speaking into the phone in exactly the same tone. She did not even glance toward my bedroom. I remember looking at my friend, probably expecting her to agree that my sister was being rude. My friend was watching the room across the hall, too. Neither of us suggested that we might be looking at a shadow or reflection. We both saw my sister. I called out again. Still no response. At that point, her complete lack of reaction felt strange, but I did not become frightened. I was too focused on being offended. I decided she was purposely pretending not to hear me. I used the threat younger siblings have probably used for generations. I'm telling Mum. My sister kept pacing. She did not laugh, turn around, or tell me she did not care. There was no sign that she had heard me at all. I finally got off the bed. My friend came with me, and we went downstairs to find my mother. I was not running from anything. I was not scared. I was simply angry and wanted my mother to tell my sister to be quiet. Mum was still standing near the sink, washing dishes. I approached her and complained that my sister was being mean. My mother barely reacted. She continued what she was doing and said, "Natalia, stop." She probably assumed I was starting another argument or trying to get my sister into trouble. I became more frustrated. I told her again that my sister was upstairs, talking too loudly and ignoring me. This time, my mother stopped washing the dishes. She looked down at me. Her expression changed. "Natalia," she said, "she isn't home. She's camping with a friend." I do not remember what I said after that. I do not remember running back upstairs. I do not remember whether my mother checked the bedroom. I do not remember watching her call my sister or confirming where she was. My memory seems to stop at the exact moment my mother told me she was not home. Everything after that is almost completely blank. That missing section frightens me almost as much as the sighting itself. The beginning of the day is clear. I remember sitting on the bed. I remember my friend beside me. I remember the pink shirt, the jeans, and the ponytail. I remember my sister pacing with the phone. I remember becoming angry because she ignored me. I remember going downstairs and speaking to Mum. Then there is nothing. It is as if the rest of the afternoon was removed. My mother remembers the conversation. My friend remembers seeing my sister. But none of us seems able to explain what happened afterward. The simplest possibility is that my mother was mistaken. Maybe my sister had returned early from the camping trip without telling her. She could have come into the house quietly, gone upstairs, and later left again. My mother may have believed she was still camping because she had not seen her arrive. That would explain why I saw her so clearly. But it does not explain why she ignored me. My sister would never have remained completely silent after I shouted at her several times. It also does not explain why my friend and I apparently accepted my mother's statement instead of immediately saying, "No, she is upstairs right now." Surely one of us would have taken Mum to the bedroom. If my sister had actually been home, the situation would have ended as soon as my mother saw her. Years later, my sister confirmed that she had been camping. She was not secretly at home that afternoon. The trip was real. She had no memory of returning to the house or speaking on the phone in her bedroom. Another explanation is that we saw someone else. Maybe one of my sister's friends had entered the house and gone into her room. A teenage girl wearing similar clothes could look like my sister from across the hallway. If she was focused on a phone call, she might ignore a younger child shouting at her. But no one else should have been in the house. The front and back doors would have made noise, and my mother was downstairs. A stranger could not simply walk upstairs without being noticed. The person also looked exactly like my sister to both me and my friend. I did not hesitate or think she only resembled her. I recognized her immediately. A reflection is another possibility. There may have been a mirror in my sister's room or some glass surface that reflected movement from another part of the house. Perhaps I saw myself, my friend, or an image from a television, and interpreted it as my sister. But the layout makes that difficult. The figure was pacing through the bedroom. She wore specific clothes. She appeared to hold a phone and speak. A reflection would also react when the person creating it moved. This figure continued the same behavior while I shouted. My friend saw the same thing. We could both have misinterpreted a coat, poster, or moving shadow, but it seems unlikely that we would construct the same detailed person. There may have been a television playing in my sister's room. A program showing a teenage girl in a pink shirt could reflect against a wall or mirror. From my bed, the moving image might appear to be someone pacing. The voice could come from the television. If my sister often watched television in her room, I might automatically assume the figure was her. But I remember the person occupying the room with depth. She walked behind and in front of furniture. She was not flat against the screen. I also believe the room's television was off, though I cannot be completely certain after so many years. We might have been playing pretend. Children can become deeply absorbed in games and imagination. Perhaps my friend and I were acting out a story involving my sister. We convinced ourselves she was across the hallway, then went downstairs to complain. Over time, the imaginary scene became a real memory. But my anger did not feel playful. I expected my sister to respond because I believed she was physically there. My friend later remembered the same event without me asking her to. That happened years afterward, at my 16th birthday. Until then, I did not know she still remembered. We were talking when she briefly mentioned the day we saw my sister in her room, even though she was away camping. My heart dropped. By that time, I had begun questioning my childhood memory. I wondered whether I had dreamed it or mixed together 2 different days. Hearing my friend mention it independently made the experience real again. She had carried the same memory for years. She remembered seeing my sister. She remembered that my sister was not actually home. We quickly changed the subject. Neither of us wanted to examine it too closely. That reaction may seem strange. If 2 people share an unexplained experience, you might expect them to compare every detail. Instead, discussing it made both of us uncomfortable. It felt safer to acknowledge that it happened and then move on. I have told my sister about it. The story frightens her too. She does not like imagining a copy of herself walking around her bedroom while she was somewhere else. We do not discuss it often. There is something particularly unsettling about seeing a person who is still alive in a place where they cannot be. If I had seen an unknown figure, I could call it a ghost. If I had seen a deceased relative, I could tell myself they were visiting. But this looked like my living sister. She was miles away camping. Yet something with her face, body, clothes, and voice was pacing around her room. Stories from different cultures describe doubles, doppelgangers, or apparitions of living people. Sometimes they are considered warnings of illness or death. Sometimes people believe a person can appear somewhere else during sleep or intense emotion. I did not know any of those stories when I was 10. I only learned about them much later. Nothing terrible happened to my sister immediately afterward. She returned safely from camping. She did not die or become seriously ill. That makes the idea of an omen less convincing. Perhaps she was thinking about home while she was away, and somehow we saw an image of her routine. That sounds supernatural, and there is no evidence such a thing can happen. It is only one way to give meaning to what we saw. The figure's behavior interests me most. It did not interact with us. It never looked toward my room. It continued pacing and talking as though following a recording. That is similar to what people call a residual haunting, where an event or action repeats without awareness of witnesses. But the person being repeated was alive. Maybe we saw an ordinary moment my sister performed many times. She often paced while talking on the phone. Our minds knew that behavior so well that they recreated it when we saw movement in her room. The pink t-shirt, jeans, and ponytail may have been clothes she commonly wore. We did not invent a strange version of her. We saw the most familiar one. The lack of response could support a hallucination or shared misinterpretation. A real person would react. An image would not. But how could two children experience the same detailed hallucination? Shared hallucinations are rare, and they usually involve strong suggestion. I may have said, "My sister is home," causing my friend to interpret an unclear shape the same way. She might have followed my attention and accepted what I described. Years later, her memory became similar to mine because we discussed it at the time. That is possible. I do not remember exactly what I said before she looked. Perhaps I pointed out my sister and complained about the noise. My friend then saw what she expected to see. Children are highly suggestible. Two people do not need to see the same thing independently for both to remember it later. One person's certainty can shape the other's perception. The clearest problem with the story is the missing memory after my mother's statement. If the experience truly happened, something must have followed. My mother would have gone upstairs. My friend and I would have shown her the room. We would have discovered whether the figure was still there. Yet none of those moments remain. Maybe the lack of memory is ordinary. Childhood memories are incomplete. I remember the surprising part because it carried strong emotion, while the uneventful aftermath disappeared. Perhaps my mother checked and found the room empty. She told us we had imagined it. We returned to playing. Nothing else happened. There would be no reason for my brain to preserve those ordinary minutes. The shock of learning my sister was away became the ending. That is likely. But it feels like a hard cut rather than a gradual fading. I cannot even remember being frightened at the time. I only remember being told she was gone. The next clear memories belong to different days. My friend has a similar gap. My mother remembers me making the complaint, but not enough afterward to provide an explanation. That shared absence gives the event an unnatural feeling, even if memory loss from childhood is completely normal. I have wondered whether my mother's statement frightened me so badly that I blocked out what followed. Children sometimes respond to overwhelming fear by disconnecting from the moment. Maybe I returned upstairs and saw something worse. Perhaps the figure was still there. Maybe it finally turned toward us. I have no memory of that, and I do not want to invent one. There is no evidence anything else happened. The missing section should not be filled with the most frightening possibility simply because it is blank. Still, the mind wants to know where the scene ended. Did the figure disappear the instant my mother said my sister was away? Was the bedroom empty when we returned? Did we even go back upstairs? Those unanswered questions continue to bother me. My mother might have known more than she told us. Perhaps she checked the room alone and found a normal explanation. Maybe my sister had left a video playing, or clothing near a fan created movement. Mum may have dismissed it and never considered the event important enough to remember. To a child, the sighting became supernatural. To an adult doing dishes, it may have been another strange claim from two children playing upstairs. Her calm response at first suggests she did not hear an extra person walking or talking above her. The house was quiet enough that she might have noticed a 17-year-old pacing and speaking loudly. I had complained that my sister was making noise. If the voice was clearly audible downstairs, my mother would have known someone was home. Perhaps the sound was only clear to me because I was directly across the hallway. Or perhaps there was no sound outside my perception. My friend remembers the visual figure more than the exact voice. I may have assumed she was talking because she held a phone and moved her mouth. Again, memory has reduced the details. The clothes remain vivid because they made her recognizable. Pink shirt, jeans, ponytail. I've asked myself whether those were the clothes my sister had worn before leaving for camping. If so, I may have seen her earlier that day or the previous day and stored the image. Later, while playing, I imagined her in the room. Maybe she had been packing there shortly before leaving, pacing with a phone while wearing those exact clothes. My memory could have placed that real scene on the wrong day. Children often confuse when something occurred. The conversation with my mother may belong to another moment when I complained about my sister while she was away. Over time, the two memories joined. This is one of the strongest explanations. Memory does not preserve dates and sequences perfectly. I might truly remember seeing my sister in those clothes and truly remember being told she was camping, but the two events may not have happened at the same time. My friend's agreement makes that harder, though not impossible. We may have created the combined story together shortly afterward. Once both of us accepted it, the version remained stable for years. The fact that she mentioned it at my 16th birthday does not prove the original perception was accurate. It proves the memory was shared. Even so, hearing her bring it up without warning was terrifying. For years, I had been able to question myself. Maybe I was the only one who saw the figure. Maybe my friend had not paid attention. Maybe I dreamed her presence entirely. Then, my friend casually referred to the day we saw your sister when she wasn't home. She did not ask whether I remembered. She spoke as though the event was part of our shared history. That was enough. I did not need to remind her of the clothes or the hallway. She already knew which day she meant. I think part of the reason we avoid talking about it is that there is no useful conclusion. We cannot go back and inspect the room. The house has changed. I no longer sleep in that bedroom. The furniture has moved, and the light would fall differently now. My sister is older. My friend and I are no longer children sitting on the bed. Even if we recreated the layout exactly, whatever happened may never repeat. There was only one sighting. No one else in the family saw my sister's double. There were no later apparitions, messages, or warnings. That lack of repetition supports a memory error or visual mistake. It also preserves the experience in its purest form. A familiar person appeared once where she could not be. She behaved normally, except that she could not see or hear us. Then we went downstairs and learned she was gone. I still become anxious when I write about it. The fear is not only that we saw something paranormal, it is the idea that something could imitate a person so perfectly. The figure did not look dead or monstrous. It wore my sister's clothes. It had her hair. It used her voice. It knew how she paced during phone calls. If I had walked into the room, I wonder what I would have seen up close. Would the face have remained hers? Would it have continued ignoring me? Would it disappear when touched? Or would I have discovered some ordinary object and laughed at myself? I am glad I went downstairs instead. I have considered whether the figure was somehow my sister herself, seen at a distance through an experience we do not understand. Maybe she was asleep or daydreaming at the campsite and imagined being home. Perhaps people can project a familiar routine during moments of stress. There is no scientific support for that, and I have no reason to believe she was in danger or thinking intensely about us. It is only less frightening than the idea of something else wearing her appearance. My sister does not remember anything unusual happening at the campsite. She did not have a dream about her room or feel as though she was somewhere else. From her perspective, she was simply away with a friend. Meanwhile, 2 children at home watched her pace across her bedroom. I try to stay with the rational explanations. We misremembered the date. We saw a reflection. A familiar shape and sound became my sister because I expected her to be there. I influenced my friend's perception. The story grew more definite over time. Those explanations are all more likely than a living person appearing in 2 places at once. But none of them completely removes the image. I was sitting on my bed with a clear view through 2 open doorways. My sister walked back and forth in a pink t-shirt and jeans. Her ponytail was tied behind her head. She held a phone and spoke to someone I could not see. I shouted at her. She did not respond. I shouted again. Her face never turned. I threatened to tell our mother. She continued pacing as though my friend and I were invisible. Then I went downstairs and complained. My mother stopped washing the dishes. She looked at me and said my sister was camping with a friend. The memory ends there. Years later, my friend proved that I had not carried it alone. She remembered the same impossible afternoon. My sister was not home, but something that looked exactly like her had been walking around her bedroom, speaking into a phone and ignoring us from only a few feet away. My mother's house, and the layout matters because it is the main reason none of us could explain what happened. Her house has a partly open floor plan connecting the kitchen and living room. The two rooms are close together, but a staircase stands between them. The stairs are almost like an island in the middle of the ground floor. You can walk around either the front or the back of them to move between the living room and kitchen. Because the staircase blocks the direct line of sight, someone sitting in the living room cannot see most of the kitchen. You have to move near one of the openings on either side of the stairs before the kitchen comes into view. The rooms are close enough, however, that sounds carry easily. If someone opens a cupboard, drops a plate, or runs water in the kitchen, people in the living room can normally hear it. The kitchen itself has only a few possible entrances. There are two large windows, but they are difficult to open. They are not the kind that slide quietly with one hand. Opening either one takes effort, and anyone climbing through would make noise. There is also a door leading from the kitchen to the back porch. My mother always keeps that door locked. Even when it is unlocked, it is loud. The hinges, frame, and lock all make enough noise that it is nearly impossible to open carefully without someone inside noticing. No bedrooms, hallways, or other rooms connect to the kitchen. Anyone entering it has to come from the living room side, climb through one of the windows, or use the porch door. The kitchen sink also has one of those faucets controlled by a single lever. You lift the handle upward to turn on the water and push it down to shut it off. The higher you raise it, the stronger the water flows. It was not an old-fashioned faucet with two knobs that might slowly loosen. The lever had to be physically lifted. One night, after dinner, we were sitting in the living room talking. Everyone present was an adult. The evening had been completely ordinary. We had eaten, cleared the table, and settled into the living room. No one was moving around the house, and nobody had any reason to return to the kitchen. While we were talking, we suddenly heard water begin running in the kitchen. It was not a light dripping sound. The faucet came on loudly. Because of the staircase between the rooms, we could not see the sink from where we were sitting. We all stopped talking. For a second, everyone looked at everyone else. The reaction was immediate, because none of us had gone into the kitchen. We had all been together in the living room. There was no child in the house playing a joke, and no known person standing near the sink. The water continued running. We got up and went around the staircase into the kitchen. The faucet handle was lifted all the way up. Water was pouring into the sink at full blast. It was not halfway open. It had not shifted slightly and produced a thin stream. The lever was raised as far as it could go, exactly as if someone had walked over, grabbed it, and deliberately turned the water on as strongly as possible. There was nobody in the kitchen. The windows were closed. The porch door was still shut and locked. We turned off the faucet and started checking the room. There was nowhere for a person to hide. The kitchen was not connected to another part of the house, and anyone leaving through one of the two openings around the staircase would have come directly toward us. We had all been sitting in the living room, close enough to see anyone trying to pass. For a person to enter from outside, they would have needed to open one of the large windows, climb through, cross the kitchen, raise the faucet lever, climb back out, and close the window behind them. They would have had to do all of that silently. The windows took enough strength to open normally. They could not have been raised, lowered, and secured again without noise. The porch door was no better. Someone would have needed to unlock or force it, enter, turn on the sink, leave through the same door, close it, and somehow lock it again from the inside. Even if the door had been left unlocked, we would have heard it. It was simply too loud. There also was not enough time. We entered the kitchen almost as soon as the water began running. Whoever turned it on would have had only a few seconds to disappear. No footsteps crossed the porch. No door slammed. No window moved. There was no sound except the water. At first, we probably assumed one of us had forgotten to turn it off after dinner. That explanation did not work because the faucet had not been running while we sat down. The house had been quiet. We heard the exact moment the water started. A faucet left slightly open might begin dripping or make changing noises as pressure moved through the pipes. But this one went from silent to full force. One of us would also have noticed a full stream running during the entire conversation. The sound was loud enough to stop us immediately. Someone may have suggested that the lever had slowly lifted by itself. That did not seem possible when we looked at it. Gravity should pull a loose handle downward, shutting the water off. It should not raise the lever against its own weight until the faucet reached full power. If the cartridge inside the faucet was damaged, water pressure might force internal parts to move. Maybe a sudden pressure change could push the handle upward. That became the only ordinary explanation I could think of. There might have been trapped air in the plumbing. An air pocket or pressure surge could pass through the pipe and affect the faucet mechanism. Pipes sometimes bang, shake, or make strange sounds when water pressure changes. This is often called water hammer. If the faucet's internal parts were worn or loose, perhaps a sudden force from inside the plumbing was strong enough to move the handle. The problem was that we did not hear the pipes shake. There was no bang before the water started. The lever did not rise a small amount. It went all the way up. The other faucets in the house also remained off. If a large air bubble or pressure surge had traveled through the plumbing system, I would expect some reaction elsewhere. The bathroom faucets might spit air, leak, or make noise. The toilets might refill. Another pipe might shake. Nothing else happened. Only the kitchen sink turned on. That does not completely rule out a plumbing problem. Different faucets have different cartridges and levels of wear. The kitchen handle may have been looser than the bathroom handles. A pressure change could affect the weakest fixture while leaving everything else untouched. The faucet may also have had a mechanical defect we did not know about. Inside a single lever faucet are several parts that control flow and temperature. If one of those pieces broke, shifted, or became worn, water pressure might have forced the valve open. The handle could have moved with it. A plumber might have looked at the faucet and found an ordinary explanation immediately. We did not dismantle it that night. We only saw the position of the handle and the water pouring from the spout. Still, most mechanical failures do not look so deliberate. The lever was standing upright, as though a hand had raised it. That image made the normal explanations difficult to accept emotionally, even if one of them was probably correct. Another possibility is that someone had bumped the faucet earlier. Maybe the handle had been left in an unstable position after the dishes were washed. It could have remained balanced just below the point where the valve opened. A vibration from the house, the plumbing, or people moving in the living room might have caused it to shift. Once it moved past a certain point, pressure inside the faucet could have pushed it farther upward. That sequence might make it appear to turn on suddenly, but the handle would still have needed to move against gravity. It also seemed strange that it ended at the highest possible position rather than stopping partway. Perhaps an object near the sink moved and struck it. A dish rack, hanging utensil, or cleaning tool might have fallen against the lever, lifted it, then dropped into the sink or onto the counter. We did not find anything obviously out of place. No object fell loudly before the water started. Nothing remained leaning against the handle. An animal could theoretically have done it. A cat might jump onto the counter and press or catch the faucet lever with its body. A large rat or other animal could knock something into it. But there were no animals in the kitchen when we entered. There was no time for one to escape without being seen. A small animal might hide beneath cabinets or appliances, but lifting a stiff faucet handle completely upward would require a very specific movement. It would also likely disturb something on the counter. Nothing looked disturbed. The shared reaction is important to me. I was not alone in another room when I heard the faucet and later found it running. All of us were together. We all heard the same thing. We all entered the kitchen and saw the lever raised. There was no chance that I had dreamed it, misremembered it, or turned it on myself without realizing. Something physically caused the faucet to move. The only question is what? Because the staircase blocked our view, there was a short period when the sink was hidden. That creates some uncertainty. A person could have been in the kitchen before the water started. Perhaps someone entered while we were eating or cleaning and remained hidden. But there was almost nowhere to remain unseen. Even if a stranger somehow hid behind a counter, inside a pantry, or near an appliance, they would still need to escape once we approached. They could not pass us through either opening around the stairs. The outside exits were closed. My mother's house was not located in a way that made silent entry easy. The windows and porch door were secure. Nothing had been forced. A family member playing a prank also seemed impossible. Everyone who could have done it was sitting in the living room. We saw each other when the water began. No one could leave, enter the kitchen, turn on the faucet, and return without the rest of us noticing. The possibility of a remote-controlled or automatic faucet did not apply. It was not operated by a sensor. There was no electronic system that could activate accidentally. The handle had to move. That physical requirement is what made the experience so unsettling. If a light turned on, I could blame faulty wiring. If a television started playing, I could blame a remote signal or timer. If we heard footsteps, I could blame the structure of the house. But a faucet lever standing fully raised suggested an action. Something had lifted it. We inspected the porch door more than once. It was still locked. Even if someone outside had somehow reached through an opening, the sink was too far from the windows and door for them to touch the handle. No string, tool, or object was attached to it. There was no reason anyone would go to such effort simply to turn on water and disappear. Nothing else was missing. No one tried to enter another room. The event did not seem like part of a burglary. If a person had been inside, the situation would have been far more serious than a strange faucet. That possibility may be more frightening than a paranormal explanation. An intruder could have been watching us from the kitchen while we talked in the living room, hidden only by the staircase. They might have turned on the water accidentally and fled. But every physical detail argued against it. There was no escape route. The doors and windows were unchanged. We entered too quickly. The longer we looked around, the less sense a human explanation made. I do not remember whether anything else unusual had happened in my mother's house before that night. This event stands out because it was witnessed by several people and involved something we could physically examine. There was no vague shadow. No feeling of being watched. No dream. The sink was off. Then, we heard it turn on. When we walked into the kitchen, it was running at full power. Afterward, the faucet may have worked normally. If it repeatedly turned itself on, we would have replaced it immediately and treated it as a mechanical problem. The fact that this seems to have been a single event makes it harder to test. One unexplained malfunction can happen in any machine. A part may catch once and never do it again. Temperature can change the shape of metal or plastic slightly. Water pressure can rise for a moment. A valve can slip. When the conditions do not repeat, the cause remains invisible. That is the explanation I usually return to. Something inside the faucet must have failed temporarily. It is more likely than an invisible person entering the kitchen, but I still cannot picture how internal water pressure could lift the external handle all the way up. A plumber might say it is possible. Another might say it cannot happen with that kind of faucet, unless the handle or cartridge was already broken. We never received a definite answer. I also wonder whether one of us misunderstood the exact starting sound. Maybe the faucet had been running very softly, and a change in pressure suddenly made it louder. When we entered, vibration could have shifted the lever upward. The event might not have happened in the order we remember. Memory tends to create a clean sequence. Silence, sudden water. Everyone looks at each other. The faucet is fully open. In reality, there may have been several small mechanical changes we did not notice. Because we were talking, the first stage of the leak could have been hidden by our voices. Then, the water became strong enough to hear. By the time we saw the sink, the handle had moved farther. That is possible. But every person in the room reacted to the water at the same moment. It sounded sudden. We did not hear a stream slowly growing louder. It was as though someone had quickly pulled the lever up. The layout made the sound more frightening because we could not see the source. For those few seconds, the staircase hid the kitchen completely. We knew something had happened on the other side, but none of us knew what we would find. A person could have been standing there. A pipe could have burst. Water could have been flooding the floor. We moved together because no one wanted to investigate alone. Then we came around the stairs and saw a perfectly normal kitchen with one impossible detail. The faucet was raised. The water was pouring straight into the sink. There was no mess, no broken pipe, no person. It looked exactly like the result of a simple human action. That ordinariness made it disturbing. The event did not announce itself as supernatural. Nothing dramatic happened afterward. The lights did not flicker. Doors did not slam. No figure appeared behind us. We shut off the water and stood there trying to explain it. Sometimes the most unsettling experiences are small. A large, impossible event gives you permission to panic. A small one forces you to question whether you missed something obvious. We kept thinking there had to be a simple answer. One of us must have been in the kitchen. The door must have been open. The handle must have been loose. There must have been air in the pipes. But each explanation failed against at least one detail. Everyone had been together. The exits were secured. The door was noisy. The windows were difficult to move. The other faucets were unaffected. The lever was fully raised. I do not believe a ghost necessarily turned on my mother's kitchen sink. There is no way to prove that, and plumbing can behave in ways most people do not understand. A hidden defect remains the most realistic answer. But even years later, when I imagine that night, I do not picture an internal valve or pressure surge. I picture the three of us sitting in the living room, separated from the kitchen by the staircase. I hear our conversation stop. Then, I hear the sudden rush of water from the room none of us can see. We look at one another because every person who should be in the house is already accounted for. We walk around the stairs together. The kitchen is empty. The windows are shut. The porch door is locked. And above the sink, the faucet lever is standing as high as it can go, with the water running at full blast as though someone had lifted it only seconds before we arrived. When I was 10 years old, my older sister had a teddy bear named Charlie. She was 6 years older than me, so she was around 16 at the time. That was one of the reasons the situation frightened me so much. If she had been very young, I might have believed Charlie was an imaginary friend or part of a game. Children often give toys personalities and talk about them as though they are alive. But my sister was a teenager. She was old enough to know the difference between a teddy bear sitting on a shelf and one moving by itself. Charlie was not especially frightening during the day. He was just an ordinary teddy bear that had been in my sister's room for a long time. I do not remember anything unusual about his appearance. He was not damaged, antique, or obviously creepy. There was nothing about him that should have made me afraid. He belonged to my sister, and she kept him in her bedroom with her other belongings. The first strange thing happened when I heard her say that Charlie was dancing. I do not remember the exact circumstances surrounding that first comment. She may have said it during the day or mentioned it in passing after waking up. What stayed with me was the certainty in her voice. She said Charlie had been dancing. I did not know what she meant. Maybe she had dreamed about him. Perhaps she had seen the teddy bear move in the darkness and understood it as dancing. Maybe she was only joking with me because she knew I was younger and easier to frighten. Older siblings sometimes say strange things just to see how the younger child will react. At first, I tried to treat it that way. Still, the comment stayed in my mind. That night, when the house became quiet, I began thinking about Charlie sitting inside her bedroom. During daylight, a teddy bear is soft and harmless. At night, the same toy becomes a dark shape with a head, arms, and eyes. Even when you know it cannot move, part of your mind watches it. I began imagining what my sister might have meant by dancing. I pictured Charlie standing upright when no one was looking. I imagined his small legs moving across the floor and his arms lifting in stiff, jerking motions. I thought about him turning slowly toward the bed. The more I tried not to think about it, the clearer the image became. I could not sleep. I stayed in my room listening to the house. Every small sound seemed important. The walls creaked. The plumbing made occasional noises. Floorboards shifted as the temperature changed. Normally, I could ignore those things. That night, each sound seemed connected to my sister's room. I finally decided to go and tell my parents that I could not sleep. I wanted one of them to reassure me that my sister had only been joking. I also wanted to be near an adult. The hallway outside my room was dark. I stepped out quietly and began walking toward my parents' room. Before I reached it, I heard my mother's voice. She was inside my sister's bedroom. I stopped. I could hear Mom speaking softly to my sister. I could not understand every word, but it sounded as though she was trying to calm her down. That immediately made the situation feel more serious. If my sister had only made a joke about Charlie earlier, why was my mother in her room during the night? Maybe my sister had called out. Perhaps she had been having a nightmare. I moved closer to the doorway. I did not walk fully into the room. I only leaned enough to listen and see part of what was happening. The room was dark or only dimly lit. My mother was near my sister's bed, speaking to her. I do not remember seeing Charlie. I do not know whether he was on the bed, on a shelf, on the floor, or somewhere else in the room. The absence of that detail bothers me now. At the time, I was focused entirely on my sister. Then, she suddenly screamed. Charlie's dancing. but now he's angry. She shouted the words at the top of her lungs. It did not sound playful. She did not sound as though she was trying to scare me. Her voice was filled with fear. The scream went through me. I did not wait for my mother to respond. I turned and ran back to my bedroom. I closed the door and got into bed. I may have pulled the blanket over my head. I remember trying to remain completely still, as though movement would attract attention from the hallway. I expected to hear footsteps outside my door. I imagined Charlie leaving my sister's room. If he had been dancing and had now become angry, I did not know what that meant. Was he angry with my sister? Was he angry because my mother had entered the room? Had he noticed me listening from the doorway? Those thoughts were childish, but at 10 years old, they felt completely real. I listened for my mother to leave my sister's room. I do not remember hearing her return to bed. I do not remember my sister crying again. I also do not remember anyone coming to check on me. The rest of the night is unclear. I must have fallen asleep eventually, but I cannot remember how long I stayed awake. From that night onward, I became afraid of my sister's bedroom after dark. During the day, I could walk past it. At night, I avoided the doorway. I did not want to look inside and see Charlie sitting somewhere he had not been before. If the door was open, I looked away as I passed. If it was closed, I imagined him standing behind it. I began having problems sleeping. I would lie awake listening for movement in the hallway or sounds from my sister's room. Even if I did not hear anything unusual, the possibility kept me alert. I began thinking that Charlie might only move when everyone else was asleep. Perhaps that was why my sister saw him and nobody else did. Maybe he became still whenever an adult entered. The fact that my mother had been in the room during the scream should have made me feel safer. Instead, it made the event more frightening. My sister had not been alone when she said it. An adult had been standing beside her. That meant someone else should remember what happened. Later, I asked my sister about Charlie dancing. She denied ever saying it. She acted as though she had no memory of screaming those words. She did not admit that she had been frightened or that our mother had come into her room. That confused me. I knew what I had heard. I had not been asleep in my own bed dreaming about it. I had left my room because I could not sleep. I had heard Mum's voice and walked toward it. I had leaned into the doorway. Then my sister screamed. The sequence felt clear, but she insisted she had never said it. My mother was even stranger. She seemed to have forgotten that she went into my sister's room that night. When I brought it up, she did not confirm the conversation or explain what had happened. She either genuinely did not remember or acted as though it had never occurred. That left me alone with the memory. My sister sometimes continued talking about Charlie dancing during the night, or at least that is how I remember it. But when I directly asked her about those comments, she denied making them. It was as though there were two versions of her. One version spoke about Charlie at night and seemed terrified of him. The other version, awake during the day, had no knowledge of it. That raised the possibility that she had been sleep-talking. People can speak, shout, sit up, or even move around while still asleep. They may appear awake because their eyes are open and they can respond to someone, but they have no memory of it the next morning. My sister may have been experiencing a nightmare involving Charlie. She could have seen the teddy bear moving inside the dream while looking at the real room. This would explain why she believed he was dancing. It would also explain why she later denied saying anything. She genuinely may not have remembered. My mother might have entered the room after hearing her call out. She may have sat beside her and tried to wake or calm her. When my sister screamed that Charlie was angry, she could still have been partly asleep. Once she settled down, Mum returned to bed and forgot the details. To my mother, it may have been one of many ordinary nights dealing with a child's nightmare. Years later, she might remember getting up, but not which room she entered or exactly what was said. That is probably the most reasonable explanation. My sister was not seeing a living teddy bear. She was dreaming. I overheard part of the nightmare and took it literally because I was 10. The problem is how awake everything seemed. My mother was speaking to her as though having a conversation. My sister's scream was clear and direct. She did not mumble meaningless words. She said Charlie was dancing, and then added that he was angry. It sounded like she was describing something she could see in the room. Sleep talking can be very coherent, though. Some people answer questions and describe detailed scenes without waking. They may even become frightened when someone tries to interrupt the dream. My mother might have asked what was wrong. My sister answered from inside the nightmare. I only heard the final sentence and assumed both of them were fully awake. There is also the possibility that I was the one who was not fully awake. I had been unable to sleep, but perhaps I had already drifted off and experienced a vivid dream. I may have dreamed that I left my room and heard my mother speaking to my sister. The hallway, bedroom, and voices all came from memory. My sister's words were connected to the earlier comment about Charlie dancing. Then I dreamed that he had become angry. When I woke, I believed I had physically gone into the hallway. False awakenings can feel completely real. A person dreams that they get out of bed, walk through the house, speak to people, and return to sleep. Only later do they realize none of it happened. That would explain why my mother and sister did not remember the night. It would also explain the missing details. I cannot remember where Charlie was. I cannot remember what my mother said. I cannot remember returning to bed beyond the feeling of running. The dream may have preserved only the frightening sentence. But I remember the cold fear of the hallway and the sound of my sister screaming. I remember leaning toward the doorway. The experience feels different from an ordinary dream. Of course, many vivid dreams feel completely real. The strength of the memory is not proof that I was awake. Another possibility is that my sister and mother were playing a joke. My sister may have known that her earlier comment frightened me. Perhaps she and Mom noticed me listening at the doorway and decided to make the story worse. My sister screamed the line, and I ran. Later, they denied it to keep the joke going. That would be a cruel prank, especially because I was only 10 and developed sleeping problems afterward. I do not believe my mother would intentionally frighten me that badly. My sister might have done it, but coordinating the scene with Mom seems unlikely. My mother's voice sounded calm, not playful. My sister's scream sounded genuine. If it was a joke, they never admitted it, even after seeing how much it affected me. That does not fit their behavior as I knew it. Charlie may also have moved for an ordinary reason. Perhaps he was sitting somewhere unstable. A fan, open window, or shifting blanket could make him sway or fall. In dim light, that movement might look like dancing. If my sister woke suddenly and saw the teddy bear moving, she could become frightened. When Mom entered the room, Charlie might have fallen into a different position that looked threatening or angry. A teddy bear's expression does not change, but shadows can change the face. A smile can look like a frown. Dark plastic eyes can reflect light. A toy leaning forward can seem as though it is staring. My sister might have interpreted the change as anger. That would mean she experienced a real movement, but gave it a frightening explanation while half asleep. The toy itself would still be ordinary. I wish I remembered where Charlie was kept. If he sat on a shelf, vibrations from someone walking could cause him to shift. If he lay on the bed, my sister's movements could make him appear to dance. If he hung from something, air could move him. Without knowing his location, I cannot judge how strange the movement would have been. There is also a chance Charlie was not physically in the room that night. My sister could have been hallucinating as she woke. Sleep-related hallucinations often involve familiar objects or people becoming threatening. A person may see a figure beside the bed, insects on the walls, or objects moving. The images can continue for several seconds after the eyes open. My sister might have looked toward the teddy bear and seen it moving because her dream had not ended. When Mum spoke to her, the hallucination continued. She screamed. Then she woke fully and forgot. That explanation fits almost everything. It also means my sister may have been genuinely terrified even though there was no external danger. I have wondered whether she had other sleep problems at the time. Maybe she experienced night terrors, sleep paralysis, or recurring nightmares. She was a teenager and may have been dealing with stress she did not discuss with me. Teenagers often have irregular sleep schedules and intense dreams. She may not have wanted to admit what happened because she felt embarrassed. Denying the story could be easier than explaining that she saw her teddy bear move. My mother may have protected her privacy by refusing to discuss it. If that is what happened, their silence had an unintended effect. It made the event seem supernatural. A simple explanation, such as your sister had a nightmare, might have allowed me to forget it. Instead, both of them acted as though the night never happened. Their denial made me trust my fear more than them. At 10 years old, I did not understand sleep disorders or memory gaps. I understood only that I had witnessed something and the adults refused to confirm it. That made Charlie feel like a secret. I began wondering whether my sister denied it because the teddy bear did something to her. Maybe she was afraid to speak about him during the day. Perhaps Charlie only allowed her to describe what happened while she was asleep. Those thoughts were not logical, but fear rarely is. Every night, the hallway became a place I needed to avoid. My sister's room was not dangerous during the day. Sunlight entered, people walked in and out, and Charlie remained still. At night, the room felt occupied. I did not know whether my sister was asleep or speaking to someone. Sometimes I thought I heard her voice. I refused to investigate. I never wanted to lean into that doorway again. The phrase itself stayed with me. Charlie's dancing, but now he's angry. The word now made it worse. It suggested that something had changed. Dancing might be strange, but harmless. Anger meant danger. My sister sounded as though she had been watching him for long enough to recognize a change in his mood. I imagined the dancing stopping. I pictured Charlie turning his head, maybe his arms lowered. Perhaps he realized someone else was in the room. I know those images came from my own imagination. I never saw the teddy bear move. I never saw his expression change. All I had was one sentence shouted from a dark bedroom. But a child's mind can build an entire scene from a few words. My sleeping problems lasted long after the event. Even when I was not thinking specifically about Charlie, nighttime made me anxious. I listened for voices. I avoided dark doorways. I worried that familiar toys or objects might behave differently when no one was watching. The fear became part of my routine. I do not know whether my sister continued keeping Charlie in her room. I may have avoided looking closely enough to notice. I never wanted to touch him. If I saw him during the day, I reminded myself that he was only a stuffed toy. Fabric, thread, filling, plastic eyes. Nothing inside him could dance or become angry. But that logical list did not help at night. Years have passed, and I can now think of several explanations that made no sense to me then. My sister could have been sleep-talking. My mother could have entered the room, calmed her, and forgotten. I could have experienced a false awakening. The teddy bear might have moved because of a fan or unstable surface. The entire event may have been a dream based on something my sister said earlier. Any of those explanations is more likely than a possessed toy. Memory is also unreliable, especially from childhood. The first comment and the nighttime scream may have happened on different nights. My mind could have joined them into one story. Perhaps my sister did not say Charlie was dancing before the event. Maybe I added that detail later because it explained why I went into the hallway. My mother may remember the incident differently, or she may have been half asleep and genuinely forgotten. The fact that I cannot recall what happened afterward suggests the memory is incomplete. I accept all of that. Still, the memory has never felt invented. I remember needing my parents because I could not sleep. I remember hearing Mum's voice from the wrong room. I remember moving toward my sister's doorway. I remember my sister screaming so loudly that I felt the words in my chest. I ran because I believed something inside that room had changed. What frightens me now is not only the possibility that Charlie moved, it is the uncertainty around the people who were there. My sister says she never said those words. My mother does not remember going into the bedroom. I am left with a memory involving two people who cannot confirm their own roles in it. Maybe they were asleep. Maybe I was asleep. Maybe all three of us were in different stages between dreaming and waking. That would explain why the event feels real to me and unreal to them. The house may have contained no paranormal presence at all. It may have contained three people whose minds were not fully awake. But even that explanation is unsettling. It means a person can walk, speak, scream, comfort someone, and then remember nothing. A child can witness it and carry the fear for years while everyone else moves on. I no longer claim that Charlie was alive. I never saw him dance. I only heard my sister say that he did. Her fear could have come from a nightmare. My fear came from believing her. But sometimes, when I think about the dark hallway and the open bedroom door, I remember the certainty in her voice. She was not asking whether Charlie had moved. She was not confused. She sounded as though she was watching him. And whatever she believed she saw had stopped being playful. Charlie was dancing. Then, he became angry. My mother was in the room when she said it. I was standing close enough to hear every word. Yet by morning, neither of them seemed to remember the night at all.
Quick pause, then we're right back. A lot of people watch one story and leave, but some stick around. They hit subscribe and come back every night. If you want to be one of them, the button's right there. Turn on the bell too, so you never miss a new one. That's it. Let's get back to the story.
When I was about 14, my older brother was around 19 and had a habit of staying out late. He would go out with friends and sometimes return long after everyone else had gone to bed. This happened often enough that the family had a routine around it. Years earlier, when my bedroom was at the front of the house, he used to get my attention by throwing small stones at my window. His phone was almost always broken, out of battery or missing, so calling the house was rarely an option. He did not want to knock loudly or throw stones at my parents' window because waking them would get him into trouble. My room had been the easiest solution. I would hear a small stone hit the glass, look outside, see him waiting near the front of the house, and go downstairs to let him in. By the time this particular incident happened, however, the situation had changed. I had moved into a bedroom at the back of the house. My brother was also older and trusted with his own front door key. There was no longer any reason for him to wake me when he came home. More importantly, it would have been almost impossible for him to reach my new window from outside. We lived in a small village in England, almost in the middle of nowhere. Behind our garden was a factory that made things like pillows, blankets, and other fabric products. Beyond that was a main road, but the area was usually quiet late at night. The factory was not somewhere people seemed to be walking around at 1 in the morning. There were no houses immediately behind ours, and no normal reason for anyone to be wandering through the back garden. A large fence surrounded the property. The house was built on sloping land, so the rear section was raised higher than the front. It was not standing on stilts, but the foundations created enough height that my bedroom window was difficult to reach from ground level. Someone outside could not simply walk up and tap the glass. They would have needed to climb the fence, cross the garden, and then find some way to reach the raised side of the house. There were no trees beside my window. No branches touched the wall or glass. There was nothing obvious that could knock against it. One night, at around 1 in the morning, I was awake in bed when I heard tapping on the window. It was not a loud crash like a stone hitting the glass. It sounded much closer and more controlled. Tap, tap, tap. It genuinely sounded as though someone was touching the window with their fingertips or nails. The noise came from the glass itself, not from the wall or roof. I had my curtains closed, as I usually did. I have always disliked leaving windows uncovered at night. Even when I was younger, I preferred not to see the darkness outside. Because the curtains were drawn, I could not see what was making the sound. My first thought was my brother. The old habit was so familiar that I reacted without thinking through the details. He had thrown stones at my previous bedroom window many times. Hearing something at the glass late at night immediately made me assume he was outside and wanted to be let in. For a moment, I forgot that he now had a key. I also ignored how difficult it would be for him to reach the back window. I imagined that he had climbed over the fence for some reason. The fence occasionally fell or leaned during long periods of strong wind, so perhaps part of it was down. Maybe he had walked around the house and found a way to tap the glass using a stick or by climbing onto something. None of that made much sense, but I was tired. The familiar explanation felt better than considering anything else. The tapping continued. It was patient and steady. There was no voice. My brother did not whisper my name or call for me. That was slightly unusual, but I still believed it was him. I got out of bed and walked toward my bedroom door. I intended to go downstairs and open the back door. The back entrance was closer to my room, and if he had somehow reached the garden, that was where I expected him to be waiting. I did not open the curtains first. I did not look through the window. At the time, I did not think I needed to. I already knew who I believed was outside. I reached my bedroom door and opened it. At that exact moment, I heard the front door downstairs being unlocked. The sound was unmistakable. The lock moved. The door opened. A second later, I heard my brother enter the house. I stood in the doorway, trying to understand what I was hearing. The tapping on my bedroom window was still continuing behind me. My brother was at the front of the house. The window was at the back. There was no possible way he could have been in both places. Even if he had somehow reached my window and then run, he could not have crossed the garden, climbed the fence, gone around the entire house, reached the front entrance, unlocked the door, and stepped inside within those few seconds. The distance was too great. The land around the house made the route awkward. I would have heard him moving, and the tapping had not stopped while he was supposedly running. It continued until he came through the front door. Then it stopped. That was the moment I became frightened. Until then, the sound had been irritating, but familiar. Once I knew my brother was inside, it became something else. Someone or something had been tapping on the window while he was arriving from the opposite side of the house. I did not go back into the room to investigate. I did not pull open the curtains. I did not look through the glass. I was terrified that I might see a face pressed close to the window. The fact that the room was raised made that possibility worse. A person standing normally in the garden should not have been able to reach it. If there was a face outside, it would mean someone had climbed onto the wall, found a ladder, or was standing on something I could not see. I left the room and went downstairs. I do not remember exactly what I said to my brother. I may have asked whether he had been behind the house, even though I already knew the answer. Perhaps I told him someone had been tapping on my window. What I remember most clearly is the relief of seeing him inside. His arrival proved that the person I had expected was safe and accounted for. It also proved the tapping had another source. I did not ask him to go outside and check. At 14, I wanted an explanation, but I did not want it badly enough to risk discovering someone in the garden. The house was surrounded by darkness. The nearest people were not close. If an intruder had crossed the fence, we had no idea whether they were still there. A real person was the first serious possibility. Someone might have been trying to frighten me. A teenager from the village could have known which room was mine and climbed into the garden as a prank. They may have tapped on the glass, then hidden when they heard the front door open. The timing could explain why the tapping stopped. My brother's arrival may have scared them away. That explanation is frightening, but possible. The fence was large, not impossible to climb. Someone determined enough could get over it. The raised rear wall would make reaching the window difficult, but they could bring something to stand on. Perhaps there was a bin, garden object, or piece of equipment beneath the window that I have forgotten. A tall person might reach it with an extended arm. They could also use a stick, branch, or other object to tap the glass. There were no trees beside the house, but someone could carry something into the garden. If they heard the front door, they might drop down and remain silent until we stopped listening. They could then leave through the same part of the fence. We did not search the garden, so there was no way to know. The problem is motive. Why would someone cross a large fence at 1 in the morning simply to tap on a 14-year-old's bedroom window? The village was small. There were not many strangers walking around. Anyone who knew the house well enough to find my room might also know that my family was inside. It would be a dangerous prank with very little reward, especially because my curtains were closed and the person could not even see my reaction. They had no way of knowing whether I was awake. Unless they had been watching the window, they would not know I heard them. That makes a human prank feel less likely. An intruder with more serious intentions is worse to consider. Maybe someone was testing whether the room was occupied. They might tap on the window and listen for movement. If no one responded, they could try another entry point. The front door opening may have frightened them away. But there was no later attempt to enter. Nothing was stolen. No damaged fence, tool, or footprint was found, although I do not remember anyone checking carefully in daylight. Another possibility is that the sound came from the house itself. Old buildings make noises that seem deliberate. Temperature changes can cause window frames to expand and contract. At night, the glass cools while the inside of the house remains warm. Wood, metal, and plastic move at different rates, creating sharp taps. A loose section of the frame might produce a repeated sound that resembles fingernails. The noise may have stopped when my brother opened the front door because the pressure inside the house changed. Opening an exterior door can cause a slight draft or shift in air pressure, especially if other doors and windows are closed. That pressure change could move the window frame and stop whatever was tapping. This is a reasonable explanation. The timing may not have been supernatural at all. My brother opened the door, air moved through the house, and the sound ended. Because I had already assumed someone was outside, I connected the two events. The tapping may have had nothing to do with him. The house sat on sloping ground, which could place stress on its frame. Settling materials might create noise at certain temperatures. At 1 in the morning, the outside air may have cooled enough for the window or wall to shift. The sound could repeat several times and then stop naturally. I do not remember whether the weather was windy, cold, or changing that night. If it was windy, an object could have struck the outside wall. The fence sometimes fell during long periods of strong wind, so the area was clearly exposed to weather. A loose cable, piece of guttering, or small object might swing against the glass. I believe there were no branches nearby, but there could have been a wire or part of the building I did not notice. The darkness and closed curtains prevented me from checking. The rhythm sounded like fingers, because that was the pattern my mind recognized. An insect or bird could also have tapped against the window. Moths and other insects sometimes strike glass repeatedly when attracted to light. A bird might peck at its reflection, although 1 in the morning would be an unusual time for that. A bat could brush the glass or catch insects near the window. Small animals can make surprisingly human sounds. However, the taps seemed controlled and strong enough to wake and concern me. They did not sound like wings or claws scrambling across the surface. They sounded like someone intentionally asking for my attention. The old habit with my brother may have shaped that interpretation. For years, noises at my window had meant one thing. He was outside. My brain heard a similar sound and supplied the familiar answer. Even though the new room was in a different location and he had a key, the association remained. Perhaps the tapping was ordinary, but I transformed it into a person because of earlier experiences. When he entered through the front door, the contradiction made the harmless sound terrifying. If I had never had that routine with him, I might have ignored the window completely. There is also a possibility that I was partly asleep. I may have awakened from a dream involving my brother tapping at the window. The sound could have continued as a sleep-related hallucination while I got out of bed. When the real front door opened, I became fully awake, and the imagined tapping stopped. People can hear knocks, voices, footsteps, or other sounds while moving between sleep and wakefulness. These sounds can seem completely external. A person may get out of bed and walk several steps before the hallucination fades. I felt awake, but that does not prove every part of the experience came from outside. My brother's late arrival could have influenced the dream before I consciously heard him. Perhaps I detected his key in the lock or footsteps near the front of the house while still asleep. My brain turned those sounds into the older memory of stones hitting my bedroom window. I woke, heard the imagined tapping, and began walking downstairs. When the front door opened fully, the real source became obvious, and the false sound stopped. This explanation fits the timing extremely well. The tapping and the door may have been two versions of the same incoming sound, processed by a half-awake brain. However, I remember them as separate. The tapping came from behind me at the back of the house. The front door opened below and toward the other side. I could hear both at once for a brief moment. That overlap is why I became certain it was not my brother. Memory may have sharpened that overlap over time. Perhaps the tapping stopped a second before the front door opened, but the events felt simultaneous. Years later, the order became cleaner. The sound continued. My brother entered. Then it stopped. Childhood and teenage memories often preserve the emotional structure more strongly than exact timing. I try to allow for that. Still, the physical layout remains important. The back of the house was raised. The garden was fenced. There were no trees beside the window. The factory and road beyond the property did not provide an easy route into the garden. At 1 in the morning, there should not have been anyone near the house. A person tapping with their bare fingers would need to be standing somewhere they could not normally stand. That is what makes the memory difficult to dismiss. I have sometimes wondered whether a worker from the factory could have crossed behind the house. Perhaps the factory operated at night, even though I assumed it was empty. Someone on a break might walk near the fence, hear movement, or decide to play a prank. But they would still need to enter our property. The fence separated the garden from everything behind it. The main road added distant traffic, but a passing vehicle could not create taps on one specific window. Headlights or vibrations might shake something loose, yet I do not remember a vehicle passing at the exact time. A small stone or piece of debris could have been thrown by machinery or tires from the road. One stone might strike the glass. Repeated taps like fingers would require several pieces or an object remaining near the window. The sound also stopped precisely when the front door opened, which feels too organized for random debris. There may have been plumbing or heating pipes inside the wall. Pipes can knock sharply when water begins or stops flowing. My brother entering the house may have used a tap, toilet, or heating control shortly afterward, but the sound occurred before he came inside. The boiler might cycle during the night and stop when a door opened because of a thermostat change. Yet the sound seemed to come directly from the glass. At 14, I knew the difference between a pipe in the wall and something touching the window. At least, I believed I did. I never opened the curtains, so I cannot confirm that the glass physically moved. That choice protected me from seeing something frightening, but it also prevented any explanation. If I had looked, I might have seen a loose cable, a bird, or rain beginning outside. I might also have seen nothing and become even more afraid. Or I might have seen a person. The uncertainty remains because I refused to check. I do not regret it. People often say they would investigate strange sounds, but that confidence usually comes from imagining the event safely afterward. When you are 14, alone in a dark bedroom, and someone seems to be tapping directly on your window, curiosity does not feel brave. It feels dangerous. The curtains are the only thing preventing you from seeing whatever is inches away. Opening them would also reveal your face and position to anyone outside. If it was an intruder, looking could encourage them. If it was something else, I had no desire to acknowledge it. My brother's arrival probably made the safest option obvious. I could leave the room and stay near another person. There was no reason to remain beside the window. I avoided looking outside even after the tapping stopped. I did not want to discover marks on the glass or movement near the fence. By morning, the garden probably looked normal. If anyone checked, nothing memorable was found. No similar incident happened often enough to create a pattern. At least, not that I remember. That supports an ordinary explanation. A one-time combination of wind, house movement, and tiredness can create a frightening event. If someone or something had deliberately targeted the window, it might have returned. Then again, the front door opening may have interrupted it. Whatever was outside may have realized someone else had arrived and left. The sound itself was not aggressive. There was no scratching or pounding. The window did not rattle in its frame. It was a light, deliberate tapping. That almost made it worse. Violent noise would suggest weather, an animal, or someone trying to break in. Gentle tapping suggested awareness. It sounded like the way a person tries to wake someone without alerting the rest of the house. That was exactly how my brother used to get my attention at the old bedroom. Perhaps whatever made the sound was only accidentally copying that pattern. But in the moment, it felt as though something knew what the noise meant to me. It knew I would assume my brother was outside. It got me out of bed. It made me walk toward the door. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if my brother had been a few minutes later. I would have gone downstairs and opened the back door. I expected to find him waiting there. If no one was outside, I might have stepped onto the porch or into the garden to look around. The tapping may have continued from above while I stood beneath the window. Or it might have stopped the moment I opened the door. I am glad I never found out. His key turning in the front lock stopped me before I reached the stairs. That sound gave me the information I needed. My brother was not behind the house. The person tapping did not need to be let in. Years later, I still returned to the same rational possibilities. The frame contracted. A wire or loose object touched the glass. An animal was outside. I was partly asleep and misheard the front door. Someone climbed the fence as a prank and fled when my brother arrived. Any one of those is more likely than something supernatural. But each explanation leaves a detail unresolved. There were no branches or trees by the window. The rear wall was raised. The fence made access difficult. The sound was too deliberate. I heard it continuing while my brother entered from the front. Then it stopped. I have no evidence of a ghost. I did not see a figure. Nothing appeared inside the room. There was only sound. That makes the story easier to dismiss, but sound can be more frightening than sight, because the mind has to create the missing image. I never saw what was tapping. In memory, it could be anything. A hand reaching up from below. A person balanced against the wall. A child standing where no one should be able to stand. Something with long nails touching the glass through the darkness. Those images came later. At the time, I only knew I did not want to open the curtains. The safest explanation is that the house made the noise. The most realistic threat is that a person had entered the garden. The explanation that still frightens me is that neither of those things fits. I was 14 years old, living in a quiet village in England. At around 1 in the morning, someone tapped on the back window of my raised bedroom. I assumed it was my brother, even though he had a key and no way to reach the glass. I got up to let him inside. When I opened my bedroom door, I heard him unlocking the front entrance on the opposite side of the house. For a few seconds, the tapping continued behind me while my brother stepped through the front door. Then, it stopped. I never pulled back the curtains. I never saw what had been waiting outside. And I still do not know whether refusing to look meant I missed an ordinary explanation or avoided seeing something I would remember even more clearly. When I was around 5 years old, I had a slumber party at my house with several of my cousins. I do not remember much about the party itself. I am sure we stayed up later than usual, talked, played, and eventually fell asleep wherever there was space. What I remember clearly happened after everyone had gone quiet. I woke in the middle of the night in my bedroom. The room was dark, and the house was silent in the way it only becomes silent after children finally fall asleep. I had already been afraid of the dark, so waking alone immediately made me uncomfortable. Then I heard scratching at my bedroom door. It did not sound like one quick scrape caused by something brushing against the wood. The scratches were long and continuous. Something seemed to drag downward along the other side of the door, pause, then begin again. I lay still and listened. At 5 years old, I did not understand what could make a sound like that. I thought of fingernails, claws, or something standing in the hallway and slowly pulling its hands down the door. I should have called for my parents. Instead, in the way small children sometimes react when they are frightened and angry at the same time, I yelled, "Stop!" The scratching stopped. It did not fade gradually. It ended immediately after I spoke. For a few moments, there was complete silence. That should have comforted me, but it made the sound feel more deliberate. A branch, mouse, or part of the house would not normally listen to a child. Whatever had been scratching seemed to understand me. I stayed in bed and waited for the noise to return. Nothing happened. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep again. Only a few minutes seemed to pass before I woke for a second time. The scratching had started again. This time, it was louder and faster. The long scrapes rushed down the door one after another, as if whatever was outside had become impatient. I yelled for it to stop again. The first time, it had obeyed. This time, it continued. The sound did not slow down or react to my voice. I remember being frightened, but I was also very young and exhausted. Children sometimes respond to fear in ways that do not seem logical later. I did not leave the room. I did not call for my father. I lay back down, turned away from the door, and somehow went to sleep while the scratching continued. When I woke for the last time that night, the room looked different. My closet door was open. I could not remember leaving it that way. Inside the dark closet, I saw two red orbs staring toward me. They were positioned like eyes. I could not see a face or body around them. There were only two red points suspended in the darkness, fixed in my direction. I froze. The scratching had frightened me, but this was worse. The closed bedroom door had at least placed the sound outside the room. The closet was inside with me. Whatever I believed I was seeing was only a short distance from the bed. I stared long enough to know the red lights did not immediately disappear when I noticed them. They seemed to stare back. I was so frightened that I felt sick. But again, instead of screaming or running, I rolled over and faced away from the closet. I pulled myself into the bed and eventually fell asleep. That reaction sounds impossible when I describe it now. People imagine that if they saw glowing red eyes in a dark closet, they would run from the room. But I was 5. My bed was the only place that felt remotely safe. Leaving it would have meant putting my feet on the floor, moving closer to the closet, and crossing the dark bedroom alone. Turning over was easier. If I could not see the eyes, I could pretend they were not there. The next morning, I told my father what had happened. I explained the scratching, how it stopped when I first yelled, how it returned louder, and how I later saw red eyes in the closet. He rolled his eyes. To him, it was probably an obvious nightmare. I had been at a slumber party, stayed awake too late, and already had a strong fear of darkness. Children have vivid dreams, especially after an exciting evening. I may have woken several times without becoming fully conscious in mixed parts of the dream with the actual room. My father had no reason to believe anything had entered the house. There were no scratches on the door that I remember. No animal was found in the hallway or closet. Nothing had attacked me. By daylight, the room looked normal. The simplest explanation is that the entire experience was caused by sleep. The scratching may have been part of a dream. I could have experienced a false awakening, believing I was awake in my bedroom while my mind continued dreaming. The sound stopping when I yelled would make sense because I controlled both parts of the dream without knowing it. When it returned louder, my fear had increased, so the dream became more intense. The closet opening and the red eyes could have been the final stage of the same nightmare. There are also experiences called hypnopompic hallucinations, which happen when a person is waking from sleep. The eyes are open, and the bedroom is real, but dream images continue appearing over the environment. People may see figures, animals, faces, lights, or eyes in dark corners. They may hear knocking, scratching, breathing, or voices. The hallucinations can feel completely physical because the person is partly awake. At 5 years old, I would not have known the difference between a sleep hallucination and something standing in my closet. The red orbs may also have had an ordinary source. A toy inside the closet could have had reflective plastic eyes. A small electronic device might have contained red indicator lights. Light from outside could have reflected from two metal objects, buttons or decorations. In a dark room, the brain searches for familiar shapes. Two small points of red light easily become eyes. Once I believed they were staring at me, fear would make it almost impossible to see them as anything else. The closet door may have opened because it was not properly latched. Air pressure, a sloping floor, or the movement of the house could cause it to swing during the night. Someone from the slumber party may have opened it earlier and left it nearly closed. When I first woke, it looked shut. Later, it moved open on its own. The scratching at the bedroom door could also have come from an animal. A dog or cat might have wanted to enter the room. When I yelled, it stopped because it heard my voice. Later, it returned and scratched more urgently. That explanation fits the sound responding to me. I do not remember whether we had a pet at the time, but even without one, a small animal could have been inside the house. A mouse in the wall or a branch against the exterior might produce scraping sounds. Wooden doors and frames can also make long creaks as temperature and humidity change. Because I was frightened, I may have interpreted several unrelated noises as one creature. Still, the memory stayed with me because the sequence felt connected. Something scratched outside the door. I told it to stop, and it stopped. When it returned, it sounded angrier. Then I woke to the closet open and two red eyes inside the room. Even if every part had an ordinary explanation, my 5-year-old mind experienced it as something moving closer. It began outside. Then it was inside. After that night, I disliked sleeping in the bedroom even more. The room always gave me a strange feeling. I dreaded being alone there after dark. Whenever I did sleep in it, I often dreamed about a ghost following me. I never saw the ghost clearly. That was part of what made the dreams unsettling. I would know it was nearby, moving behind me or waiting in another room, but I could never turn fast enough to see it. Sometimes I felt it following me through the house. Other times I knew it was standing just outside my view. The ghost did not need a face. The feeling of being followed was enough. Because of those dreams and the memory of the scratching, I often chose to sleep in the living room instead. We had a large flat-screen television there. At night, when the television was turned off, the dark screen became like a black mirror. It reflected the room behind me, including part of the kitchen and the hallway. I would stay awake for long periods because I had trouble sleeping. Eventually, I would fall asleep in the living room where I felt less trapped than in my bedroom. The living room was more open. It was closer to where other family members might be. There was no closet beside me with red eyes hidden inside it. But the television created a different problem. Late at night, I sometimes saw a shadow figure reflected in its screen. The figure appeared to walk from the kitchen and move down the hallway. I did not see it by turning and looking directly at the hall. I saw it in the dark reflection of the television. It had the general shape of a person, but I could not identify any features. There was no face, clothing, or color. It was only a dark human form crossing the reflected room. The first time it happened, I probably assumed a family member had gotten up. Someone might be getting water, using the bathroom, or walking back to bed. But when I turned to look, no one was there. The kitchen and hallway were empty. No footsteps continued through the house. No bedroom door closed. The figure existed only in the television screen. This did not happen every night. That would have made it easier to identify a reflection or regular household routine. It happened at random times, roughly twice a year. By the time I was around 10, I had noticed the pattern. Twice each year, late at night, I would see the same shadow move from the kitchen and travel down the hall in the television reflection. I did not mark the dates on a calendar, so I cannot say it occurred at exact 6-month intervals. Twice a year was how I understood the pattern as a child. Months would pass without anything happening. I would almost forget about it. Then, one night, while I was awake in the living room, the shape would cross the screen again. Each time, it frightened me. I knew to check the real hallway, but I also hated turning around. The reflection allowed me to watch the space behind me without facing it directly. If I turned and saw nothing, I would have to decide whether the figure had disappeared or whether it had moved somewhere outside my view. If I turned and saw someone standing there, that would be worse. Sometimes I stayed still and watched the screen until the figure was gone. Other times I looked quickly over my shoulder. I never found a person walking down the hall. There are several reasonable explanations for the shadow. A family member may genuinely have been moving through the house. By the time I turned, they could have stepped into a room or around a corner. At night, people often move quietly because they do not want to wake anyone. The television reflection would reduce all detail, making an ordinary person look like a featureless silhouette. I may not have heard them because I was tired or focused on the screen. The figure could also have been my own reflection. If I shifted position, raised an arm, or moved a blanket, the black screen might show a distorted shape that seemed to cross another part of the room. Television screens are curved or angled in ways that make reflected distances difficult to judge. A movement close to the sofa could appear to happen near the kitchen. Light from outside may have contributed. A car passing the house could cast a moving shadow through the windows. Someone walking on the pavement might block a streetlight, producing a human-shaped darkness across the reflected room. Tree branches, curtains, or objects outside could move in the wind. Because I only watched the effect through the television, I could not accurately determine where it originated. The twice-a-year pattern may also be less exact than I remember. I did not keep records. The rare sightings stood out because they were frightening, while all the nights when nothing happened disappeared from memory. Perhaps I saw the shadow more than twice in some years, and not at all in others. My mind simplified the events into a regular pattern. Seasons could also explain why it appeared only occasionally. At certain times of year, the angle of streetlights, moonlight, or passing car headlights may have reflected through the living room in a particular way. A person or object outside could cast the same shadow whenever the lighting conditions lined up. 6 months later, a similar angle might return. That would create what seemed like a paranormal schedule. The figure may even have been connected to someone's work routine. A family member getting home late, a neighbor passing outside, or a factory light switching on could create the reflection at certain times of year. As a child, I would not know enough about those patterns to identify them. Sleep deprivation also matters. I stayed awake for long periods at night because I had difficulty sleeping. When a person is exhausted, peripheral vision becomes unreliable. Shadows seem to move. Reflections appear deeper than they are. The brain may briefly create a human form from darkness, especially when the person is already afraid of ghosts. I had recurring dreams about an unseen presence following me. I expected something to move through the house. The television screen gave that fear a place to appear. It is possible that no external figure crossed the reflection at all. My tired brain may have produced it. But the experiences always seemed separate from dreams. I was awake, sitting in the living room, and aware of the room around me. The figure followed the same path. It moved from the kitchen down the hallway. It did not appear randomly in different corners. That consistency made it feel like something repeating a route. Some people would call that a residual haunting, an event or movement that replays without interacting with witnesses. The shadow never looked toward me. It never came closer to the sofa. It simply crossed the reflected space and vanished down the hall. If it was connected to the house, it did not seem aware that I was watching. I do not know the history of the property well enough to connect the figure to any person who lived or died there. There was no name, story, or known tragedy that explained it. The only connection was my bedroom. The scratching, the red eyes, the recurring dreams, and my refusal to sleep there made the entire house feel connected to something unseen. The shadow in the television seemed like another appearance of the ghost I could never see in my dreams. That interpretation may have come entirely from fear. Once a child believes a house contains a presence, every strange event becomes evidence. A sound at the door is the ghost. Red reflections are its eyes. A passing shadow is its body. A nightmare is it following you. Separate, normal experiences become one story. I understand that now. But as a child, the pattern felt undeniable. My room frightened me, so I slept in the living room. Then the television showed me something walking through the house. There did not seem to be a safe place. The fact that my father dismissed the first experience probably made it harder. When he rolled his eyes, I learned that telling an adult would not necessarily make the fear go away. He likely believed he was helping by refusing to encourage a nightmare. If he had acted frightened, I might have become even more terrified of the room. From his perspective, dismissing it was sensible. But to me, it meant I was alone with what I had seen. I stopped expecting anyone else to investigate the scratching or watch the television reflection with me. I simply avoided my bedroom whenever I could. I still think about the red eyes. They may have been the easiest part to explain. Two lights or reflective objects in an open closet can look exactly like eyes. The harder part is the scratching stopping when I ordered it to stop. That response made the sound feel intelligent. Yet an animal would also pause when a child suddenly shouted. It might become frightened, remain still for a few minutes, then begin scratching again more urgently. If a pet or a rodent was responsible, the entire event could be ordinary. The closet opening and red reflections may have happened later and had nothing to do with the door. My frightened mind connected them into one escalating event. That is probably what happened. Still, when I remember the night, it feels as though something tested whether I was awake. It scratched slowly. I spoke. It stopped. When I fell asleep again, it returned louder. When I ignored it and slept once more, I woke to find the closet open. The two red points were already looking at me. The later shadow figure created the same feeling. It never appeared directly in front of me. It used reflections, darkness, and the edges of rooms. It stayed where I could question whether I had truly seen it. Maybe that is why the experiences continue to frighten me. Nothing was clear enough to prove. There were no photographs, marks on the door, or other witnesses. Every detail had a possible normal explanation. A dream, an animal, a loose closet door, reflective toy eyes, a family member in the hallway, headlights crossing a dark television, exhaustion and fear. I cannot honestly claim that the house was haunted. I was very young during the first incident and already afraid of darkness. Later, I had severe trouble sleeping and often stayed awake alone at night. Those conditions are perfect for vivid dreams and visual mistakes, but the memories still feel real. I remember the long scratches moving down my bedroom door. I remember shouting for them to stop. I remember the sudden silence. I remember waking again to faster, louder scraping that no longer listened to me. I remember rolling away from the open closet because two red orbs were staring out of it. And years later, when I slept in the living room to avoid that bedroom, I remember watching a human-shaped shadow walk from the kitchen down the hall through the black reflection of the television. It happened rarely enough that I could never prepare for it. Months would pass. I would begin believing I had outgrown the fear. Then, late at night, the dark screen would show movement behind me. The figure would cross the house without making a sound. And for a few seconds, I would feel the same thing I felt, at 5 years old, that something was moving through the darkness, that it knew I was awake, and that it preferred to remain just unclear enough that no one else would ever believe me. When I was around 6 years old, shortly before Halloween, I was looking through a costume catalog. Most of the costumes did not bother me. There were superheroes, monsters, witches, cartoon characters, and all the usual things people dress as for Halloween. Then I found a picture of a woman wearing a long white dress. I cannot remember what the costume was supposed to be called. It may have been a ghost, a dead bride, or simply a frightening woman. There was nothing especially complicated about it. The woman wore a long white dress that covered most of her body. Her face was pale, and there was something about the way she stood that immediately made me uncomfortable. I did not stare at the page for long. I turned away from it and continued looking through the catalog. At the time, I did not think the picture had affected me that badly. It was only a Halloween costume. I knew it was probably a model wearing makeup and clothing for a photograph. But the image stayed somewhere in my mind. That night, I went to bed as usual. I always slept with my bedroom door open. From my bed, I could see part of the hallway outside. The hall was never completely dark, but it was not well lit either. A weak light from somewhere else in the house reached it, leaving most of the corners in shadow. Even before this happened, I found the hallway creepy at night. During the day, it was only a normal part of the house. At night, it looked much longer. Doorways became dark openings, and ordinary objects lost their familiar shapes. Still, I was used to sleeping with the door open. I think the open door made me feel closer to my parents. If I became frightened, I could call for them without feeling trapped inside my bedroom. That night, I fell asleep and began dreaming about the woman from the catalog. In the dream, she was following me. It was not limited to our house or neighborhood. The dream seemed to move through different places, almost as though I were traveling around the world while trying to escape her. No matter where I went, she found me. I would run through streets, buildings, and places that changed without warning. One moment I might be somewhere familiar, and the next I would be in a place I had never seen before. The woman remained behind me. Her long white dress moved as she followed. Sometimes she seemed far away. Other times she was suddenly close. I do not remember her speaking. She did not need to explain what she wanted. I knew she was trying to kill me. The dream continued until she finally caught up. She raised the knife and moved toward me. Just as she was about to stab me, I woke up. I was sweating. My heart was beating hard, and for several seconds I could still feel the fear from the dream. The bedroom was dark, but it looked real and familiar. I was in my own bed. The woman was gone. At least, that was what I first believed. Then I noticed that something felt wrong. I had the strong feeling that someone was watching me from the hallway. I did not hear footsteps or breathing. There was no voice calling my name. It was simply a feeling that I was no longer alone. I tried to remain still. Part of me did not want to look toward the open door because I was afraid the nightmare had not completely ended. But the feeling became stronger. Eventually, I turned my head toward the hallway. The woman from the dream was standing there. She was just beyond my bedroom door, in the dimly lit hall. She wore the same long white dress. Her face was turned toward me. She had an enormous smile. It was too wide to look friendly. The expression did not match a normal human smile. It looked stretched and fixed, as though she were pleased that I had finally noticed her. She did not rush into the room. She did not raise the knife. She only stood there and watched me. For a moment, I could not move. The woman from the catalog had followed me through the entire dream. I had woken just before she stabbed me, and now she appeared to be standing in the real hallway outside my bedroom. I screamed for my parents. I shouted for them to come quickly. The woman disappeared. I do not remember seeing her walk away. One moment she was standing there, and the next the hallway was empty. My parents came to my room. By the time they arrived, there was nothing for them to see. The hall looked normal again. I tried to explain that the woman from my dream had been standing outside the door. I probably told them about the catalog and the knife. To them, the explanation must have seemed obvious. I had seen a frightening costume earlier that day, dreamed about it, and then woken while still confused. Children have nightmares, especially near Halloween. The woman had not entered the house. She was only an image left behind by the dream. That should have been the end of it. It was not. I began having the same nightmare again. Night after night, the woman in white followed me. The details changed, but the structure remained the same. I would be somewhere inside the dream, trying to escape. She would appear behind me. I would run. No matter how far I traveled or how many doors I closed, she kept coming. Sometimes I could see her walking slowly in the distance. Other times I would turn around and find her almost close enough to touch me. She always wore the white dress. She always wanted to kill me. The dream usually ended when she was about to catch or attack me. I would wake suddenly, frightened and sweating. Then I would feel her watching from the hallway. When I turned toward the open door, I would see her standing there. Sometimes I saw the full shape of her body. Sometimes I only saw the white dress or the outline of a woman in the darkness. But the smile was always there. She would disappear when I screamed, looked away, or when someone came to check on me. The nightmares continued for years. I believe they lasted around 4 or 5 years. They did not necessarily happen every single night for that entire period, but they returned often enough that I began expecting them. I went to bed wondering whether that would be another night when she came back. The fears sometimes began before I fell asleep. I would look at the hallway and imagine her already standing there, just beyond the part I could see. Every shadow seemed capable of becoming the white dress. Every sound from another room made me wonder whether she was moving through the house. I became afraid to turn my back toward the open doorway. If I faced the wall, I imagined her entering while I could not see. If I faced the hall, I had to stare into the darkness and wait for something to appear. There was no comfortable position. The doorway had once made me feel safer because it connected me to the rest of the house. After the dreams began, it felt like an entrance. The woman never needed to open a door. I had left it open for her. When I woke during the night, I checked the hallway immediately. Sometimes nothing was there. On other nights, I thought I could see her. I would turn on a light or call from my parents. The figure would disappear. That does not necessarily mean anything supernatural happened. Light changes the way a hallway looks. A shape made from shadows can vanish the moment a lamp is switched on. A half-awake brain can also continue producing dream images for several seconds or even longer after someone opens their eyes. The experience is sometimes called a hypnopompic hallucination. A person wakes, but part of the brain remains in a dreaming state. They may see people, animals, faces, or figures inside the real bedroom. The images can appear solid. They can stand in doorways, move toward the bed, or disappear when the person becomes fully awake. I did not know anything about sleep hallucinations when I was 6. To me, waking meant the dream was over. If I opened my eyes and saw the bedroom, then anything standing in the hallway had to be real. The fact that the woman disappeared when my parents arrived fits a sleep-related explanation. Their voices, footsteps, and the lights coming on would wake me fully. Once the dreaming part of my brain switched off, the figure vanished. The same thing could happen when I screamed. The effort of shouting might bring me fully into consciousness. That would make it seem as though the woman reacted to my voice and disappeared deliberately. The costume catalog also provides a clear source for her appearance. I had seen the woman during the day. Her image frightened me, even if I did not admit it at the time. My mind used that picture to create a recurring nightmare. The long white dress, pale face, and frightening smile all came from something real I had seen. The dream did not invent a completely unknown person. It exaggerated an image that was already in my memory. This is probably the most reasonable explanation. But it did not feel reasonable when I was a child. The woman seemed aware of me. In the dreams, she followed no one else. She was always looking for me. When I woke, she stood in the hallway and continued watching. The nightmare and the bedroom felt connected, as though waking did not stop her. It only changed the place where she appeared. The smile made everything worse. If she had looked angry, I might have understood her as a monster. If she had looked blank, I could have mistaken her for a shadow. Instead, she smiled as though she enjoyed frightening me. She seemed happy that I had turned around. Sometimes I tried not to look. I would wake with the feeling that she was there and force myself to face the other direction. But not looking did not make me feel safer. I imagined her moving closer while my eyes were closed. Eventually, the fear became too strong, and I would turn. If I saw her, I screamed. If I saw nothing, I continued watching the hallway because I expected her to appear. The lack of sleep probably made the experiences worse. A frightened child who stays awake for long periods becomes exhausted. Exhaustion causes more vivid dreams and increases the chance of hallucinations while waking. Then, the frightening experience makes the child even more afraid to sleep. It becomes a cycle. I feared the woman, so I slept badly. Because I slept badly, the nightmares and half-awake visions became more intense. Each new sighting convinced me that the fear was justified. The repeated dreams may also have strengthened the image. The more often the brain creates the same figure, the easier it becomes to produce her again. She became familiar. My mind knew the exact shape of her dress, the way she stood, and the smile she wore. Even if the original costume photograph was no longer clear in my memory, the dream version remained. Over time, the woman may have changed from the model in the catalog into something created entirely by my fear. I do not remember whether my parents removed the catalog or showed me the photograph again. Perhaps seeing the picture in daylight would have helped. It might have reminded me that the woman was only an actor wearing a costume. But it also could have made the nightmares worse. The catalog itself may have disappeared after Halloween, while the woman remained in my dreams for years. I began changing my habits because of her. I no longer wanted to sleep with my door open. The open doorway gave me a direct view of the hallway, but it also gave the hallway a direct path into my room. Closing the door created a barrier. Even if the woman was only a dream, the solid door made me feel protected. I also became afraid of walking through the house at night. If I needed to use the bathroom, I turned on the lights first. I checked the room before entering. I looked into corners and behind doors. I wanted to be certain the woman was not waiting somewhere between my bedroom and the bathroom. Even now, at 14, I still follow some of those habits. I sleep with my bedroom door shut. If I get up during the night, I turn on the lights and check the room. Part of me knows I am older now. I understand that a costume photograph cannot step out of a catalog. I know nightmares can continue for years when something frightens a child. I know people can wake while still seeing pieces of a dream. But understanding those explanations does not completely remove the fear. The experience happened during important years of my childhood. For a long time, nighttime meant that the woman might return. The fear became connected to open doors, dim hallways, and waking suddenly. Even after the dreams stopped happening regularly, my body remembered them. A dark doorway can still make me tense before I consciously think about why. There are other possible explanations for what I saw in the hallway. The figure may have been a coat, curtain, or another object catching weak light. When people wake frightened, the brain looks for threats. A pale object can become a person in a white dress. A dark shape near the top can become hair or a face. Shadows can create the appearance of a smile. The moment I screamed and moved, my angle changed, causing the figure to disappear. The hallway's poor lighting would make this especially likely. If the same objects remained there night after night, they could create the same woman repeatedly. My memory of the catalog gave the shape an identity. This explanation would mean there was always a real visual stimulus, but I interpreted it incorrectly. It was not a full hallucination. It was a normal object seen by a frightened, half-awake child. That happens often. People mistake clothing for intruders, chairs for crouching figures, or reflections for faces. Once the light is turned on, the frightening shape becomes obvious. I do not remember ever finding a specific object that matched the woman. My parents may have pointed something out, but if they did, it did not end the nightmares. There is also a chance I was experiencing false awakenings. I may have dreamed that I woke up in my room and saw the woman in the hallway. The bedroom inside the dream looked exactly like the real one. Then I screamed, woke properly, and heard my parents coming. This would explain why the woman disappeared instantly. I never actually saw her while awake. I only dreamed that I did. False awakenings can be extremely convincing. A person may dream that they check the clock, walk through the house, or speak to someone. When they truly wake, they remain certain the earlier event happened. At 6 years old, I would have no way to recognize that. The repeated pattern could also fit. The nightmare reached the moment when she attacked me. Then I entered a second dream, in which I was awake in bed. She stood in the hallway. I screamed and finally woke. The entire experience may have been one long dream with several layers. That explanation is comforting because it means nothing ever stood outside the bedroom. But the memories feel divided. I remember waking from the chase. I remember the real room. I remember turning toward the hallway. The transition felt clear. Of course, that feeling is exactly why false awakenings are convincing. I cannot use the realism of the memory as proof. Another possibility is that my parents or another family member briefly appeared in the hallway and I mistook them for the woman. Someone wearing a light-colored nightgown or carrying laundry could look pale in weak light. If I had just dreamed about the costume, my brain might place the dream face over the real person. When I screamed, they could step away quickly. But I usually called for my parents after seeing her, and they came from somewhere else. No one admitted standing in the hall. The woman also appeared too often for the same mistake to repeat without explanation. I have wondered whether the dream lasted as long as I remember. 4 or 5 years is a large part of a child's life. Perhaps it occurred intensely for several months, then returned occasionally over the following years. Memory compresses repeated events. A nightmare that happened many times can feel like it happened every night. I cannot give an exact count. I did not write down the dates. What I know is that the fear continued long enough to change the way I slept. It followed me as I grew older. At some point, the dreams stopped coming as often. There was no final night when I defeated the woman. She did not apologize, disappear in sunlight, or reveal who she was. The nightmares simply became less frequent. Maybe my brain matured. Maybe I became less frightened by the original image. Perhaps sleeping with the door closed prevented the hallway from becoming part of the dream. Removing the visible doorway may have broken the connection. The woman could still chase me while I slept, but when I woke, there was no dark hall waiting to complete the scene. A closed door was only a door. It did not look like a person. Even though the nightmares faded, I never completely stopped thinking about her. The original catalog image is probably much less frightening than I remember. If I found it now, I might see an ordinary Halloween model in cheap makeup. The white dress might look obviously artificial. The smile may not even be part of the photograph. My mind could have added it later. Sometimes the thing that frightens a child is not objectively frightening at all. A face, mask, or character becomes attached to fear, and the brain transforms it. The woman I remember may exist only in the dreams. She may not look anything like the costume that inspired her. That does not make the fear less real. For years, I believed something waited outside my bedroom. I could not simply tell myself it was imaginary because I saw it after waking. Adults often tell children it was only a dream, as though that immediately solves the problem. But when a dream continues into the room, the child no longer knows where the boundary is. Going to sleep becomes dangerous because that is where the woman can chase you. Waking becomes dangerous because that is where she waits in the hallway. There is no moment that feels completely safe. I understand now that recurring nightmares can come from anxiety. The woman may have represented fear itself rather than a real person or spirit. She followed me across different places because it was impossible to escape my own mind. The dream always ended before the stabbing because the fear woke me. The smiling figure in the hallway may have been the final image produced as my brain shifted into consciousness. Every part follows a known sleep pattern. Nothing requires a paranormal explanation. But there is still a small part of me that wonders why she seems so separate from the dream. Inside the nightmare, she was violent. She chased me and tried to kill me. In the hallway, she did not attack. She stood at a distance and smiled. It felt as though she knew she no longer needed to chase me because she had found where I lived. That thought frightened me more than the knife. The first night began with something harmless. A 6-year-old child looked through a Halloween catalog and saw a woman in a white dress. I turned the page. I continued my day. Then I met her again in a dream. She followed me through changing places until she raised a knife. I woke before she could stab me. I was sweating, frightened, but safe in my bedroom. Then, I felt someone watching. When I turned toward the open door, she was standing in the dim hallway with the widest smile I had ever seen. I screamed. My parents came. She disappeared. For the next 4 or 5 years, she kept returning. Maybe she was only a recurring nightmare combined with sleep hallucinations. That is the explanation I believe most of the time. But I still sleep with my door shut. I still turn on the lights before walking through the house at night. And whenever I wake suddenly and the room seems too quiet, I avoid looking toward the doorway until I am certain I am fully awake. Because part of me still expects to see the woman in white standing there, not chasing me, not holding a knife, only smiling, as though she has been waiting for me to open my eyes.
So that's where we'll stop tonight. Before you go, remember this. Every story you just heard was real. Real people, real nights, and none of them saw it coming. If that got to you the way it gets to most people, do one thing before you leave. Hit subscribe. I post new stories all the time, and I don't want you to miss them. Take care of yourself. I'll see you next time.